Hello everybody. Today my guest is Dr. Maxime Gauin, a researcher at the Institute of Development and Diplomacy and associate professor at ADA based in Baku. Dr. Gauin, it's great to see you.
For me too.
Thank you very much for being with us. I would like to start our conversation with your recent paper, one of your recent papers, which was published in 2022,
September.
dedicated to the question of Armenian terrorism.
Yes.
We understand that it is impossible to grasp this concept without appreciating its background.
Absolutely.
But what is Armenian terrorism in 2023? What are its main manifestations?
First of all, Armenian terrorism in 21st century is a legacy, so I will very briefly speak about that. It dates back 19th century. It is almost as old as Armenian nationalism. And there was a continuity across the decades against the Ottoman Empire. There was a Nemesis operation against former Ottoman and former Azerbaijani officials in 1820-22. But it continued. It continued against the Turkish state. It continued between Armenian nationalists against pro-Soviet Armenians, etc. So it continued for decades until the Great Return of 1970s, 1980s, this time mostly against Turkish targets and connected targets. But in the 1990s, there was a turn which, in a sense, continued until today, in the sense that, for example, in 1991, just before the collapse of the Soviet Union, an Armenian negotiator was killed by the Armenian Revolutionary Federation because he was suspected of weakness. He wanted to secure the autonomy of the Oblast of Nagorno-Karabakh in exchange of maintaining this territory inside Azerbaijan. And of course, for the irredentists, it was a betrayal. And we see the same reasoning today with people who threaten to kill Nikol Pashinyan, not because the statute of autonomy for former Oblast of Nagorno-Karabakh is completely out of question, but for them, of course, it is even worse to maintain Shusha and soon Rankendi inside Azerbaijan without even a statute of autonomy. So we see the same reasoning, and which is actually in itself even older, because in the Ottoman time, literally hundreds of Armenians who were loyal to the Ottoman state had been killed. Extreme nationalism is against their own compatriots suspected of weakness. You saw the trend of continuity. Another thing I want to emphasize, since the 1990s in the West, it gradually moved from terrorist attacks, traditional attacks as we saw, to threats. And the threats became more common, especially since the war of 2020. I have been threatened by extremist Armenians in 2008, but probably the half or more than the half of the written threats I received were concentrated during the 44 days of the war of 2020. There was a peak. And just another example, Jérôme Lambert is a former French MP. He is currently the chair of the Association of the Friends of Azerbaijan. He has been MP from 1986 to 2022. He has been a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee for years. He was involved in discussing plenty of foreign conflicts, including the Israeli-Arab conflict. And he said, I never ever was threatened to death by anybody until the war of 2020. So this component still exists and still is very strong, even more as, at least in some cases, they prove they are serious. There are people who have been physically assaulted, your compatriots in Brussels, Paris, Los Angeles, etc. in 2020. And last week, literally last week, a French Armenian who is against Armenian nationalism has been physically assaulted, apparently by a member of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation.
It's very interesting that you explain this concept of continuity.
Yes.
And currently, the Azerbaijan and Armenia are within the process of the peace negotiations.
Yes.
We understand that Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan is under huge pressure.
Absolutely.
He vacillates a great deal. But there's one question. Don't you think he sometimes exaggerates the influence of those extremist elements which are opposing to his agenda?
First of all, such a question cannot be fully answered today. It will be answered after decades, after the internal documents of the Armenian state and other states will be open. And secondly, the word influence, if I may say, has a certain ambiguity. If you mean the political influence in Armenia, we saw the result with the legislative elections of June 2021. We saw another evidence with the limited scope of the anti-peace demonstration last year. Even for the standards of Armenia, it was not huge demonstration. But if we speak about physical danger, as far as we know, I don't see strong evidence that is exaggerating. You don't need to have 51% of the population with you to be able to kill. Those who killed John Kennedy, they did not represent the majority of the American public opinion. Armenian nationalism in the 1880s, 1890s represented a minority of the Armenian public opinion in the Ottoman Empire. So, and another aspect I regret, it is not, I think, sufficiently discussed. In 2021, Nikol Pashinyan was released because the US federal state stopped pursuing Californian governor about that, was released. He had spent almost 40 years in jail for having assassinated the Turkish General Consul in Los Angeles in January 1982. And he immediately was expelled to Armenia in spite of the fact that he is a Lebanese citizen. Immediately expelled to Armenia. And he is at the front line of the demonstration against peace, against Nikol Pashinyan. And here I want to take just one more minute. Not only he assassinated somebody 40 years ago, but he has chosen a completely senseless defense strategy. For 18 years, 20 years, he denied the fact that he was involved. There were material evidence, but it's not me. Of course, it exasperated the American justice. And then he accepted this fact to obtain the possibility to ask for a conditional release, which was refused several times. But until the end, actually, he refused to give the names of those who gave him order to kill the Turkish Consul General. If he had said from the beginning, I am guilty, I regret, and this person gave me the order, this person helped me for the logistic preparation, he would have been released after 25 years, not 40 years. So he is ready to sacrifice his life by orders of his party, by orders of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation. So if he receives the order to kill Nikol Pashinyan, he will. For the moment, he did not receive, but for the moment.
So back to the Azerbaijani-Armenian peace process.
Yes.
It is very clear that Azerbaijan wants a peace treaty.
Of course.
Azerbaijan is in a relatively comfortable position. It won the war. And it is very clear that Armenia is not ready to sign a peace treaty. What could make Armenia sign the peace treaty or come to the terms with Azerbaijani positions within the scope of 2023 or 2024?
Several things, but I think the main issue is the feeling of personal safety for Nikol Pashinyan. Because the main fear of Nikol Pashinyan is that he signs the peace treaty, he opens the Zangazur corridors, and Russia replaces him by a puppet. To have, as we say in French, the butter and the money of the butter. To have the opening of the Zangazur corridor, but a completely infeuded Armenian government to keep for Russia the economic advantages of the opening of the South Caucasus. This is his main fear. And at one moment, somebody must give him the guarantee that such a scenario will not happen. If he has such a guarantee, I think, I am not in his office, but seen from outside, I think he will sign at such conditions. So I know it is not easy to give him such a feeling of safety. I know it will mean maybe non-diplomatic methods to prove him that these person are, these Dashnaks, these supporters of Robert Kocharian, these people of Voma and Poga, you know, the two paramilitary groups which were supposed to be banned by order of the International Court of Justice, that all these people are not dangerous anymore. Sometimes you have to give the strongest guarantees in this regard. I know it is complicated, but I think it is the core of the issue. Because he's the only one who has a personal interest in achieving peace. He lost the war. He more or less provoked the war, and he lost the war. But in history, if he remains as the man who won peace, it will be more than a compensation.
It's a very interesting point. I'd like to move to the French-Azerbaijani relations, which are not particularly excellent these days. And the main reason is feeling and perception in Azerbaijan that France supports Armenia. Before asking about French position regarding Azerbaijan-Armenian peace process, I would like to put to you these questions. We understand Armenian diaspora in France is important, but is it that important? Is it important enough to influence French foreign policy decisions regarding Azerbaijan-Armenian peace process and many other matters? Are we exaggerating its importance or not?
Yes. Currently, I would have given you a different answer if we were in the 1980s. But currently, the main strength, I'm sorry to say that, but the main strength of the Armenian diaspora, of the extremist element of the Armenian diaspora, to be more accurate, is the lack of efficiency from the Turkish and Azerbaijani side. Sorry to say that.
Could you explain?
Of course, I'm going to explain. In the sense that the militant basis of the Armenian extremist organization in France has collapsed. 20 years ago, they could put thousands of persons in the streets for demonstration. Today, they can put some dozens of persons, 100 at most. Their newspapers disappear one by one. Even their website and blogs disappear one by one. The electoral blackmail is less efficient than it used to be 15 or 20 years ago because of the assimilation, because even some people who are traditionally friendly with Armenian nationalism understood that assimilation makes that a part of the Armenian voters vote for the left, a part for the center, a part for the right, like ordinary Frenchmen, Dupont-Durand, Cohen, etc. But there are two things. First, the Armenian extremist leadership, they understood the situation. So they are using what their predecessor have achieved in 1970s, 80s, 90s. And they take profit of the fact that there is a very small Azerbaijani diaspora in France, so not electorally interesting. And the fact that the people of Turkish origin in France, I'm sorry, but they are the less educated of the whole Turkish diaspora. They don't vote often. They don't have a joint umbrella organization. There is one country in the world with an important Turkish diaspora and no umbrella organization at all. This is France. There are umbrella organizations in Germany, UK, Sweden, America, of course, Canada, but in France it seems to be unthinkable. So at no moment the Turkish or Azerbaijani side is able to present itself as an electoral force.
Yeah.
At no moment there is a strong network, I'm not speaking about individuals, no strong network of Turkic people able to deal with the medias. You don't need to be thousands of persons to have a network in the French medias. You need some people organized and working 7 days a week. The Armenian nationalists, they still have some people like that.
Yeah. The reason why I asked this question, because I wanted to clarify for myself and for our audience this following thing. Is the French support for Armenia largely attributable to the role of the diaspora or to some fundamental precepts of French foreign policy?
First, we have to clarify what you mean by support for Armenia. France, the last time France sent weapons or ammunition to Armenia, it was in 1990. They stopped doing so in 1920 because of the massacres and expulsion of Azeris from Armenia. And since the independence, France did not send a single gun to Armenia.
Right.
France sold to your country 2 satellites, which were almost immediately transferred to your army, observation and communication satellites, and sent for more than 300 million euros of military material into the total 2015, 2020, 2021, 2022. Last year, France was at the second rank for the Azerbaijani external trade, especially for weapons, for military material, let's say, because officially it was not said. And all the attempts during the war of 2020 to cancel the military contract with Azerbaijan have miserably failed. And at the end of the day, I'm asking, what is the most important? We will discuss that more in detail, I think. Yeah. Is it non-binding resolution adopted by the Senate, which is mostly made of opponent to Mr. Macron, or is it the military materials and the satellites? I am not saying these resolutions are acceptable. I'm not saying the I is totally unjustified. It's not my point. I'm saying what is the most important.
I will come to resolutions, of course. You have compared certain factual, tangible things with rhetorical support.
And one last thing, because we both of us, we could forget this important point.
Yeah.
In France, but also in the US and some other countries, there has been charters, agreements, memorandum of understanding between some local powers, some municipalities, for example, and municipalities in caliber, especially before the war. France is the only country where the government went to the court to say we do not recognize this so-called republic and a municipality cannot have its own independent diplomacy. So it was cancelled in 2019. Some municipalities appealed. They were perfectly entitled to appeal. It was rejected in 2021. And one municipality made an application in front of the Council of State, which is the Supreme Court in France, for this kind of litigation, like the Devlet Council in Turkey. And it was rejected 1 year ago, in March 2022. And here, if you allow me, I would like to ask which Azerbaijani media has mentioned that last year? Which one?
Well, those things, of course, are very important, but I would like to come back to the peace treaty negotiations.
Sure.
France wants to play a role. Azerbaijan objects. There was a meeting which was scheduled to take place on the 7th of December. Azerbaijan opposed on the basis that French participation was requested by Armenia.
I know.
The reason why Azerbaijan is of this opinion is because the perception and the feeling is that France does not want a peace treaty between Azerbaijan and Armenia very quickly on the basis of the mutual recognition of territorial integrities of the both nations. France encourages the sense in Armenia that the results of the Second Karabakh War could be reversed, and their support for Pashinyan is absolutely unprecedented. And there are many things which I can refer to. And under these circumstances, French participation is perceived to be unwelcome. And my question is, Azerbaijan is a very important country in the South Caucasus, the biggest country in terms of its economic size. And France seems to be backing Armenia within Baku-Yerevan dynamics over the peace treaty negotiations. How does it square with a sense of realpolitik?
One more time, we have to distinguish several things. Those who ask France to recognize the so-called Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh, which actually does not exist anymore, it legally never exists, they are completely against any reality, any sense of reality, any realpolitik, anything, any legal things, actually. Yes. But these people, they are not in power in France or anywhere else, first of all. One more time, France does not recognize this so-called republic, which is the basis. Secondly, for reasons I don't know completely, I know at the Prague Forum there was some tension. I was not here, I did not have access to the document, so I cannot comment a lot.
Yes.
What I can say is, at the Prague conference, Nikol Pashinyan signed, if I am not wrong,
yes,
a document recognizing the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. So here, I'm sorry, I don't understand why it is perceived. I don't say he committed no errors, which is something different. But I don't understand why it is perceived that Mr. Macron will be against the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. He was here, maybe he committed errors, maybe. But The thing is, he was here and he did not object, as far as I know, to the document Mr. Pashinyan signed. And one more time, his government, as late as last year, not after because the issue was over, emphasized that we do not recognize the so-called republic and a municipality has no right to sign any kind of agreement with a municipality of this so-called republic. So if you have a tangible, concrete argument to say there is a problem about territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, I'm ready to listen to you, but I did not hear that.
Well, the Prague Declaration, of course, was very important, but that's not sufficiently good enough because for Armenia, there's always a way out. They could say that, well, we recognize Azerbaijan's territorial integrity without Karabakh. They can always say that. So then the reference to Almaty Declaration is important, but not sufficient. The reference to United Nations Charter is important, but also we need something more tangible, which should be a peace treaty.
Of course.
And the fundamental point is that Front does not seem to be contributing to that final peace deal, which will put an end to this subject. The reality is that after the Second Karabakh War, French position has changed massively. If before 2020, France, as a co-chair of the OSCE Minsk group, was trying to present more or less balanced view, but after the war, it has changed completely. Support for Armenia on a rhetorical level, in terms of political espousal, is unprecedented. And what I'm effectively trying to say, this degree of support encourages the sense in Armenia that the consequences of the war could be reversed. And by creating this sense, France effectively contributes to the procrastination of the peace process.
I'm skipping those who are not in power. I'm speaking about Mr. Macron and his government. There certainly were wordings, statement he should have never made.
Sure.
I can only agree with that.
Yes.
But he did not do it only for bad reasons. You can do bad things for good reasons. In the sense that, one more time, with who Azerbaijan can make peace. Nobody here can say we will make peace with Robert Kocharian. We will not. Nobody can say we will make peace with the Dashnaks.
Yes.
The only person who, as Azerbaijan insists to have a peace agreement which is more than justified, it is always Mr. Pashinyan sign it. It is never we wish this person to replace him and to sign it. So from the most official Azerbaijani point of view, and I totally agree with that, it is always about Mr. Pashinyan signing peace. And one more time, he has to be reinforced, especially against Russia, because the fear of Mr. Pashinyan, one more time, is to be sacrificed by Mr. Putin. So, the thing is, Mr. Macron did not find, for the moment, the appropriate balance, the appropriate wording between I want to maintain Mr. Pashinyan in power and to end the Russian domination in the South Caucasus, and I have to take into consideration the sensitivity of Azerbaijan. But this is one thing to observe that, which is definitely an error, definitely, and seeing that he is knowingly, explicitly encouraging Mr. Pashinyan in not signing peace. If you have more specific data, I'm ready to discuss that and to admit Mr. Macron is wrong in this regard as well, but I don't see concrete element. And I will have, sorry to repeat myself, but was the sale of electronic components for your Navy in 2021? Was the sale of something about 100 million euros of military material for your army last year something encouraging Armenia?
Those things are not encouraging Armenia. I've mentioned the things which have been encouraging Armenia. And I would like to move to the subject of the Zangazur Corridor project, with your permission. I recollect, and I believe my memory serves me correctly here, so I can rely on my memory on this particular point. You mentioned that the only way to open Zangazur Corridor without a war would be through the French mediation.
Yes.
Pray elaborate.
Of course. The Russian mediation has been tried. The result was Mr. Vardanyan as a so-called state minister of the so-called Artsakh Republic. fortunately, he was forced to resign. Forced by Mr. Pashinyan, by the way. Of course, there was a strong Azerbaijani pressure, which was more than justified.
Yeah.
But in the end, it was Mr. Pashinyan who eventually said enough is enough, he has to leave. And the extremists of the diaspora were very angry with Mr. Pashinyan one more time in this regard. So the Russian mediation, I think nobody in the Azerbaijani government is considering it, as far as I know. The European mediation has been tried. There was a clear success in the sense that now the personal relationships, the personal mutual trust between Mr. Aliyev, Mrs. von der Leyen, Mr. Charles Michel is deep, is strong, is sustainable. That's fine. This is more than needed for both sides. But did it achieve the opening of the Zangazur Corridor? No. Did we hear anybody in Baku or Brussels saying we hope to convince the Armenian government to open the Zangazur Corridor force this mediation? No. So, as far as I understand, as far as I have the data, the only person who can relieve Mr. Pashinyan sufficiently is Mr. Macron. And precisely because he made errors, precisely because he used inappropriate wording, wrong wording, excessive wording, he is particularly trust in the 11. At one moment, you need somebody who is particularly trust in the 11 and who has no interest in destabilization. The powers, the government, I would like to say, the government who have interest in conflict are the Russian and Iranian government. Right. The current Russian and Iranian government.
Yes.
This is not the French government. He has no interest in that. So I agree Mr. Macron has to change a number of things. I agree selling military material to Azerbaijan is not enough. Your questions, your president's statements are in themselves incontrovertible evidence in this regard. I agree. I agree that he has to do something to achieve that.
Yeah. And what is that?
Sorry?
What is that he should do to change it?
He has to find a wording which can relieve Azerbaijan. He has to maybe to repeat what he previously said in 2020, that these territories are Azerbaijani and there is no question about that. Something he said in front of Dashnaks a bit more than 2 years ago. Did Mr. Biden say it in front of the Dashnaks? I don't think so. So seeing it again strongly, clearly would surely help, I think. I think nobody in Baku will be disappointed if Mr. Macron said Karabakh is Azerbaijan.
It would be nice to hear.
He said that, he can repeat it, I think, because he did not change his mind. I gave you some evidence in this regard. But to find a more clearer wording in this regard. And maybe to clarify that being in friendly terms with Nikol Pashinyan is not in itself being against Azerbaijan.
No, by no
means. It can be, on the contrary, useful for the peace treaty. But he has to say it more clearly. In other issues, of course, we have no time for that, but in other issues, with good intention, sometimes he uses wording he should have avoided. But of course, I agree, diplomacy is also about wording, of course.
Naturally. Thank you very much, Dr. Gauin. And my last question is, how do you imagine the final peace deal between Azerbaijan and Armenia? Who do you think will be the most important contributor amongst the mediators?
Nobody knows it for the moment, but what can be safely said is if the current situation continues, the most important contributors will be in the West. Because as long as Iran and Russia are ruled by the people who rule them today, they have, as I said, literally no interest and no will in a peace treaty.
Nice. Well, thank you very much indeed. It was absolutely fantastic to converse with you on this subject.
Thank you.
And to understand and appreciate your position, in particular when it comes to your argument that France actually, in a practical sense, has done nothing against the interests of Azerbaijan. It was very interesting to hear, and I'm sure it will be very interesting for our audience. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.